Hello and welcome to this edition of Dr. Clark's 101. Today we're going to talk some politics 101 with my good friend and colleague, Professor George Amity. And Dr. Amity, greetings and welcome, my friend. How you been?
Greetings. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's been a while. You know, every 30 days we come on and talk that good old politics.
Absolutely.
And we try and do a nice political analysis and from a political science perspective. And today we have a number of issues I hope we can address within this time frame that we have. And the issues range across the board from Pope Leo the Fourth, Pope Leo the 14th. We can talk about the tariffs and Air Force One and Democratic Party, local elections, and in particular, we can talk about some local issues which become very, very important, and also some things which is taking place in Africa. And because there's a whole host of things and things that you find is also that's highly relevant. Is it okay?
That'll be great.
Yes, sir. So let's begin our conversation today, and as we begin to talk about politics 101, and let's talk about at the height of the period in which we've talked to each other last, the advent of a new pope, and we saw the passing of the torch, and we have a new pope which is coming to play, and Pope Leo the 14th. Yes, sir. And I'd like to get your political perspective and analysis of its impact on not only in the world, in the United States, but also in our community. Yes, sir.
Well, the new Pope was somewhat of a surprise to me, but apparently, given the amount of time it took to make that selection, he seemed to have pretty good support and favor within the conclave. The most interesting thing about this new pope is that he not only has ancestral roots in the city of New Orleans and in Louisiana, but he's what I call an Afro Creole. I know we use the term Creole, but Creole can also mean just people who don't have African descent. But I use the term that he's an Afro Creole. But on the other, so I think from his background and from the places that he's been, that he is going to speak and has already spoken to some very critical kind of issues, primarily dealing with class and the treatment of constituents in developing nations. So that, to me, has been a high point of this priest. He made some statements relative to our current president, and he's spoken about two existing world leaders from more authoritarian nations and their treatment of others. One of the things that kind of was aback by this pope, took me aback by this pope, was his statement that he does not identify himself as black. So
Yes, sir.
that kind of took me back a little bit, but I understand the politics of that. The politics of not identifying your oneself as black has more to do with wanting to ally himself with others who aren't black. And I also think it also has to do with the fact that for many, the analysis of class is far superior to the analysis of race. And so I think it's a way of speaking to issues of class and poverty, and at the same time avoiding the conversation about race. For many believe race is assuming class. I believe personally that class has its own life, and clearly race has its own life.
Well, I recall years ago when Madeleine Albright was selected to be Secretary of State first, and during that particular period, it was discovered that she was Jewish, and she said she did not know it. And I talked to many of my friends who come from in the Jewish community, and they said that was not unusual because coming out of the Holocaust and coming out of that environment, a lot of times families did not tell their kids and they did not identify because that assimilation was very, very important to them. And so when you can see folks who may not know the true, the total historical background or the historical roots of their own DNA, sometimes they just don't identify by by the nature of the environment in which they grew up in.
Well,
Yes, sir.
we're in 2025,
Yeah,
so it's a little different than what it was back there. But
precisely.
I'll
Yeah.
accept that as
Yeah, and I
a
understand because
explanation.
sometimes folks do not know, and they still have to go and investigate. And I have friends I know that I've grown up with, and I shouldn't say this, but who don't identify they're blacker than black in terms of their features,
Right.
but don't identify as African Americans. Not say identify. I'm the only culturally black person they know.
I understand.
And that's the most amazing
Yeah.
thing, most curious thing. But I guess it's also a part of their class and their environment. I don't know. But let me just say this as well, and I just want to get your impact from a political perspective of why the importance of this pope. And I will say this: at the Pope Francis, his predecessor, there's something I think was the most unusual is that he allowed folks who were non-Catholics to who are he was beloved by more non-Catholics than anywhere in the world. And
Mhm.
so he was able to transcend. And here in Louisiana, we tend to be, whether you're Catholic or not, we tend to be culturally Catholic in terms of many of the things that we do. But if I can turn the conversation again and talk about some things which are important as well on the national level, and that is this president, the current president, has done some international traveling, and we know what he's done. And in the interim period in which we had spoken last, he was looking at Air Force One, and he wanted to change Air Force One and wanted to get this as a gift from another country, and to use it for his personal plane, and also put it in his library should he choose once he retires from the presidency. Now, I just like to get your political perspective, your analysis in terms of that. Yes, sir.
Well, my perspective
Yes, sir.
on this president has always contemplated whether or not he's moving within a authoritarian or fascist framework. I always use that term,
Right.
fascism. And of course, when you're under fascism, there's a tendency to have a charismatic leader who wants power to be highly centralized in the political realm. And we see that with wanting power in the executive branch, trying to do things that require legislation through executive orders. But also, under this model of fascism, they pick winners and losers in the private sector, in the corporate sector. So we see that many of the corporate leaders, corporations, for fear, have come, and there aren't many Harvards. There aren't many others, or like many of the black folks that are willing to speak truth to power with respect to this president. And so a lot of what, even though legally many things he's done, I think, has been overturned by the courts, there's still this environment which I liken to more of a fascist model, in which the corporate and private sector toe the line for fear of being isolated. And so that also is the case with tariffs, that
Yes, sir.
the tariffs usually are meant to pick winners and losers on the international scale as well. But with respect to the Air Force One, this is where I'm lost. I mean, if anything that should be in violation of the Monuments Clause is this. The idea that elected official cannot take those kinds of gifts from a foreign country because it compromises his ability to work in behalf of the nation. Uh, but we see this as a change in the political environment. The Honorable Russell Honore, in his recent speech, it mentioned that Elon Musk, who had a very significant role in the Trump administration, has contractual obligations, debt to China. So we see before our very eyes a redefinition of what's the governmental norms, but even in terms of what's legal and not legal. So to me, the selection of winners and losers internationally, the selectors of winners and losers in terms of the corporate world, and the fact that the fear that everyone has in speaking out, it's almost as though we are beginning to see the signs of fascism in practice. And then, of course, to outright violation of the Monuments Clause, I can't see anything greater evidence. And then, of course, his Justice Department says it's all right. We think he can legally do it. So that's kind of my take. That it's still a push towards this authoritarianism by a lack of criticism, a lack of guts, a lack of whatever you want to call it, by the people who are in the position to hold him responsible.
Right, and I agree with you 100%. And I also will add to that yes, I do see him using this president using the fascist model. But I say in the final analysis, if one were to take a good look, and I would go beyond the fascist model, and I would say that if you look at Thomas Hobbes, he's truly a Hobbesian. And I think the fascist model is something which is it works. We know he uses that rhetoric, but the reality is that his practice is Thomas Hobbes. He believes that this current president believes that the contract is between the sovereign and the people, but the contract the sovereign and the people is that the sovereign is supreme. However, and the contract truly is between the people and the people, but not between the sovereign and the people. That's sovereign always reigns supreme. And when it comes to other governments on the international sphere, it is in a global community, it's about sovereign governments against sovereign governments. And they only exist through strength. And the ones who have the greatest strength are the ones who have power, and they're ruled by oligarchical families or oligarchical rules. We say oligarchy. Some others can say crime families, whatever you want to call it. But we'll just say oligarchy for the sense of having some degree of sensibility. But if our listeners will go and investigate and look at Thomas Hobbes and understand the nature of Western political theory, they would get a good sense of see the nature of this particular leader and how he tends to govern. And he ignores the state, ignores the courts, because the contract is not with the courts. The contract is not with the people. The contract, he's above the people and the courts. And that becomes a serious dilemma. And so that's why when we say democracy is at risk. Now, I want to just address some other issues as well before we get into some of the local issues. And I just want you to give us your take on the nature of tariffs. And we know that for a long time, tariffs have been used by Democrats and the Democratic Party, and tariffs have been used by labor unions and other groups to make it work. But now I want you just to talk about this wholesale use of tariffs and its effectiveness at this date. Here we are, more than 180 days away. Out, yes, sir.
Well, the proof of the pudding is in what's happening. And we just had a jobs report that just came out where they anticipated about 160, 130,000 jobs, and it was a dismal performance. And we're in the midst of negotiations with numerous countries, and that doesn't seem to be going well, even though the rhetoric is that the deal maker is making the deals. I believe the use of tariffs here is used to reorder the economic relationships, and some of that is valid. Some of it is valid from the standpoint that maybe there is an argument that on some deals, the United States may have been uh, taken. However, we have to understand under the previous international relations, both the military and the economic trade has always been a tool not just for economic gain. It's been a tool to set the world environment on a track where we won't be headed to World War III. And so, but here we see a total reordering of the tariffs, where we see that our former allies, the European Union, has been considered to be not our number one allies anymore. But also, when it comes to Africa, the United States has and under this Trump administration has placed the economic well-being of the continent of Africa as a low priority. So I think the idea of using tariffs to gain advantages for the nation is a valid strategy. On the other hand, it's a strategy that we have to use incrementally. You cannot use a strategy of wholesale changing of relationships and wholesale changing of tariffs among people who were previously our allies, and those people that we had important relationships with. That cannot be done radically or overnight. And I think that's the problem and that's why you see this president coming out there with certain tariffs, backing off, the whole taco
Yes, sir.
explanation, backing off. But what it does, and this is the worst fallout, not only there's been considerable losers that have been negatively affected, but it also has put us in a position where it's hurting our economy, and it's not having the effects that we say it should have. So my point is, I don't think it's being used properly. It's a tool that can be used, but it cannot be used with a wholesale changing. And we don't know what the motivation is. The motivation may be around, once again, picking winners and losers, both in terms of countries and in terms of corporations.
Yes, sir. And I would agree as well. I think there's a strategy, all right, but the strategy itself is very incompetent.
Absolutely.
And that's the big dilemma. And throughout my years, I remember I've had two roommates in undergrad. My roommate was economic major, and my roommate in graduate school was an economics major. Excuse me, and in high school, when I went to prep school, economics major. And the one thing I've discovered is that I don't know any economist in the world that recognizes what he's doing. Because for my purposes, the final result of this is what this administration has said: Americans are not obligated, and it's a privilege for them to have low prices. He wants us to manufacture everything in America, and once everything's manufactured in America, and pay more, not to pay less but pay more,
Right.
and let that class of individuals make an awful lot of money, and then Americans suffer. And so that doesn't breed and create the kind of sustainable government that we want. And in the final analysis, we know anything about Western civilization. The failure of the Greek city-state was they tried to isolate themselves. You can't isolate
Absolutely.
yourself and not have and just engage in true self-sufficiency. It just doesn't work like that. But I want to move forward very quickly in the time that we have remaining. I want you to address the nature of the Afrikaners, because we talked about that before we got on there, and I know you have some very serious concerns about the nature of Afrikaners in South Africa and the treatment of that leader. Yes, sir.
Well, one of the negative things that I spoke about is how this administration has shunned the continent of Africa. But the positive that has come out of there has been the rise of African leaders in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso,
Yes,
and many other countries, even South Africa,
even Sudan. Yeah,
that has really pushed against a U.S. dominance. And of course, what we've seen, of course, with the president of South Africa coming to the United States, treatment of the president of South Africa even worse than Zelensky. But they showed supposedly under the guise that South Africa is committing genocide, and we later found out that the films were not even from South Africa. It was from another country. So, and then, of course, on top of that, we see this president welcoming in South Afrikaners, white Afrikaners,
59
into this country, while at the same time saying if you're a person of color, if you're black, if you're Haitian, I'm going to pick you up and throw you out. So it's very clear that the international policy, the policy that is being promoted, is one in which it promotes the notion of white supremacy. And I think that's the driving force behind what's going on. It's really insult to say that, to create this illusion and at the same time treat people from Africa and African descent in such a disparaging way.
And you're correct, because it's a responsibility for intellectuals such as yourself and for us to recognize what this exists.
Absolutely.
And to make individuals aware of the nature of this supremacy that exists in the White House. But this is not the first time that America's gone through this, and we've had supremacist leaning individuals in the White House, and we know that because the White House, the executive branch, has not always been a friend to people of color. And for a long time, the Congress was not always a friend to people
Absolutely.
of color. And we certainly know that the courts have not always been a friend of people of color.
Right.
So we just have to know how to negotiate those particular sectors in American society. But I want us to turn locally. And, with this breakout, the largest breakout in Louisiana state history, and one of the largest in America, was these 10 prisoners escaped. And as a result of it, there's a big political fallout.
Absolutely.
And the fallout is statewide. It is also national. Criminologists, individuals who are all looking at this. And I would like to get your political analysis in terms of when the dust falls, who's going to remain standing?
Well, we don't know.
Yes,
that's interesting, because the thing about this breakout,
Yes,
initially the sheriff indicated that there was some outside political folk who was responsible. Now, we haven't found that out yet, if it's to be found out. But what we do know, that a lot was going on inside. In fact, this recent video that the young man who's put out on Instagram, where he's saying, I didn't escape. Somebody told me to go.
I was let out.
I was let out.
Yeah.
So, the question is, when the dust fall, is it going to be, and this is always with the case, like with Watergate, does it go up to a higher level? Or is it really something that's going to stay at the current level? But of course, we have to look at it in terms of the politics. In this regard, remember the first comments about this breakout, the governor came on his press conference and he blamed it on the judges, he blamed it on the police, he blamed it on the courts, right?
Yeah.
And in preparation, like was done in Jackson, and saying that the state needs to take over the criminal justice system in all these parishes. And of course, the DA came out and refuted, but of course pointed the blame on the other folk,
because he's not a jailer.
Yeah.
Their job is to arrest and convict, but not
then
to.
he also talked about the inability, the need that someone needed to do investigation, and so I'm just saying it looked like to me with the state coming in and putting the squeeze and the spotlight on the criminal justice system, where he got the results he wanted, which that all of the black elected officials were pointing fingers at each other. That's what it seemed to me was what was going on. But once again, and of course, Sheriff Hudson called him into question because he has publicly come out and endorsed Michelle Woodfork and saying, look, you're not a person to be objective about this situation. I don't know how it's going to come out, but I think there's still some things we don't know, and the question is, when everything comes out, at what level is the responsibility is going to be? Clearly, it affects the sheriff race in the likelihood that Sheriff Hudson will be able to get reelected. But what will it mean if others are found
new faces, old faces,
absolutely,
new practitioners?
Absolutely. What would be the public's response?
Well, this is I always appreciate your analysis. We look forward to this over the years, man. But will you please tell us what we can expect, because we have 1 minute remaining. What can we expect over the next 30 days before we come back again in July? Yes, sir.
Well, it's really interesting. Two things. There was a poll with the Democratic Party, and not surprisingly, it said that the Democrats, the base, is not as enthusiastic about their party as the Republicans are about their party leaders. So the question is, when will that reversal take place? And secondly, with respect to the mayor's race, the most recent thing was this poll came out, which showed that 51% of those polled were in favor of Councilwoman Helena Moreno. But now that gave me pause. It gave me pause because it also said that, this was commissioned by one of but it wouldn't tell you who was behind paying for the polls. So I'm very suspicious about that. Why are you going to get a poll and want people to have confidence in it? It's the old who pay the piper gets to call the tune, And also, we know in politics, there is no such thing as a neutral poll. There's only one poll, Dr. Clark, that I've always said that we can rely upon. And that's one done by George Amity. Anybody else who does a poll, you have to be suspicious of it. But to tell that information reminds me of, and people say, well, the person who did it, they were not affiliated with one of the candidates. Bull. They're always affiliated with, affect one of the candidates. We saw that with Sidney Torres. Of course, he said he wasn't, Latoya Cantrell didn't get him to do what he did, but he beat the hell out of Desiree Charbonnet in such a way that it resulted in her winning the election. So once again, by them, that's what gives me suspicion. When you say, I'm not going to tell you who's behind paying for it.
Well, when it comes to polls, and I appreciate my posters of 100%, but I will say this. My take on this is 100% is that I'll go back to the Old Testament. If Moses had taken a poll, no, you can't go out there and poll the people. You go out there. Leadership is not born from a poll. Leadership is born out of a desire and frustration. So polls are just an indicator, just a snapshot. And you're correct about these polls because, hey, look, Crest, Colgate, #1 toothpaste in America. Who was the poll by? Procter & Gamble.
That's right.
My goodness. Right. But I appreciate you for coming on. I look forward to everything that you say and do. And again, you can follow me, Dr. Gary Clark, on all platforms of social media. And as always, it's been a pleasure.